What is up, movie friends? Welcome back to Raiders of the Lost podcast. I'm Anthony.
And I'm James, and this is episode 42. We're going to do post-apocalyptic and dystopian films, including Mad Max Fury Road, Children of Men, and Snowpiercer. And I hope if you're watching, you appreciate our new set that we've built. We got some new walls. We decorated for the holiday season to bring some festive cheer for this entire month of December. And we really hope if you're checking it out that you enjoy what you're looking at right now besides our faces.
Yeah, we're using the money we're getting from the podcast and from our Patreon to really make the set look as good as possible. And we love Christmas, so it's time to throw these lights up, we thought.
And we love the holiday season is so fun. So we'll be adding more and more to the sets, but I hope you like these wood walls.
Look at these real
Anthony's
wood.
genius idea. Let's put some actual wood up on the walls, and it looks great and it feels good in here.
You know what? It looks like a real podcast now.
Yeah, it looks actually like real. Yeah, like a real show. Look at this. We have moving walls and everything. It's a production and a half now. And I'm a huge fan of post-apocalyptic films and dystopian future films. They're so fascinating. The stories too. We selected 3 movies that are very different from each other, and we also got Mad Max is really the only post-apocalyptic world film in this list, whereas Children of Men and Snowpiercer are more dystopian.
Snowpiercer, I would say, is post-apocalyptic.
I think it's both. But Snowpiercer also has dystopian. Generally means that there's like social structure. There's still people and political control and some sort of hierarchy. Whereas Mad Max is just pure mayhem.
Yeah, like for like 1984 and like THX 1138, those films are dystopian.
Mm-hmm. Children of Men is definitely dystopian. Children of Men is a movie that's on the verge of post-apocalyptic, but it's technically technically dystopian.
Yeah, absolutely. And these films, they each have their own unique styles and voices and tones, and they blend different genres into the dystopian post-apocalyptic genre in different ways. So I think they're really contrasted from one another, and I think they fit together on this list really well.
This episode of Raiders of the Lost podcast is brought to you by our friends at movieposters.com. Use coupon code Raiders15 to get 15% off your order today just in time for the holiday season. This episode is also brought to you by Manscaped. Get 20% off your order and free shipping using coupon code Raiders of the Lost at checkout. Again, Raiders of the Lost at checkout for 20% off your order and free shipping. Again, take advantage of these coupon codes on these websites for the holiday season. I'm telling you, these are great for gifts. You got to get it done. Don't go to the stores with the crazy lines and the COVID restrictions. So definitely get your gifts now. Get it out of the way. Use these coupon codes. If you enjoy our podcast and our content and want to help support us, the best thing you can do is become a patron on patreon.com, where you get special perks like personalized video sneak peeks and a monthly shout out on the podcast. Subscribing to our YouTube channel is incredibly beneficial for the full video format of the show. Also, following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, wherever you listen to podcasts is super helpful. Leaving a 5-star review really helps us get seen by new listeners, so definitely do that if you get a chance, and the written reviews are so fun to read, so thank you to everyone who's done that. We love reading those comments and those messages from you. And make sure to hit the notifications wherever you're listening or watching so you know when new episodes drop every Monday and Thursday.
Hit that bell button.
And as always, spoilers are abound. The first episode in this film is Mad Max Fury Road, which was released in 2015. Directed by George Miller, written by George Miller, Brendan McCarthy, and Nick Lathoris. This film had a budget of $150 million and a global box office of $375 million. In a post-apocalyptic wasteland, a woman rebels against a tyrannical ruler in search for her homeland with an aid of a group of female prisoners, a psychotic worshiper, and a drifter named Max. This film stars Charlize Theron, Tom Hardy, Nicholas Hoult, Hugh Keys-Byrne, Zoe Kravitz, Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, and Nathan Jones. This film was nominated for 10 Oscars and won 6, including Best Editing, Best Sound Mixing, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hair, Best Sound Editing, and Best Production Design. And this is one of the most visually stunning films and unique films in recent years, and one of my favorite ways to describe it is it's just pure insanity on an epic scale. The concept, the visuals, the action, it's just crazy awesome.
Yeah, I think everyone was taken by surprise when George Miller came out with this film because it had been a while since he had made a Mad Max, and before this he made Happy Feet. Not only is this hands down one of the best action films ever made, but like you said, it was nominated for 10 Oscars, and I think it showed the potential that an action film can be great and revered as a piece of cinema. The idea of a straight-up action film being nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, it's a rare action jewel in this genre. There are not many action movies, straight-up action movies that are nominated for Best Picture. I mean, I think the most famous one besides this is Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm pretty sure that was nominated for Best Picture. But again, that's Spielberg, so it's an expert director. Not saying that George Miller is not a brilliant director, but like you just said, he coming off the Mad Max franchise in the 80s, he really did the Witches of Eastwick. Mm-hmm. He did Babe Pig in the Big City, and he did the two Happy Feet movies. So he kind of slowed down as a director. He didn't do a ton of projects. And I feel like he's just been developing this project for the last 25 years.
Yeah, and the reason for that is the Mad Max films with Mel Gibson, they were successful, but they weren't like crazy hits. So he never was given a ton of money by studios to make gigantic films. And I think he really enjoys making animated films, which is why he did Happy Feet. And he actually wanted to originally envisioned this movie to be an animated, 3D animated Mad Max movie when he was in development on this in the early 2000s. And it took him 20 years to get this movie made from the concept of the idea to the actual production of the film. So and he was almost in production on it with Mel Gibson originally set to star, but the financial crisis hit and put a halt on any kind of production. So he had to go back to a Happy Feet sequel instead of making this film.
Yeah, he wanted Mel Gibson to reprise the role, I think, in the early 2000s. Then he was thinking about Heath Ledger as the lead when he was trying to get it developed again. And I think they said he came up with the original concept for the movie in 1998, which he had to rewrite because of 9/11, he says. So they wrote an entirely new script. So I'm sure that something about the world was just different, and he had to change the socio-political themes of it, I'm sure. And he made the original Mad Max in 1979, which starred Mel Gibson, and it launched a franchise of 3 films that Mel Gibson starred in as the title character. And now, obviously, it's being rebooted because we have Mad Max Fury Road. We have the Furiosa spinoff that's going to be made, starring Anya Taylor-Joy. And then Tom Hardy's actually signed on to 3 more Mad Max films, so he's going to be in another Mad Max spinoff in that direction, following that character still. And you can tell that Miller clearly had the vision of something enormous and vast in the 70s and 80s, but he couldn't really do it with the budget he was working with. Like you said, he didn't have much to work with. The first film was $300,000 budget.
That's inflated. It was $100,000 in the time they made it.
And the second film had a budget of $3 million, and the third film had a budget of $10 million. So if you think about it, the first 3 installments of this franchise that Miller made, he had less than a tenth of the budget that he worked with on the Mad Max Fury Road movie.
Yeah, Fury Road had a budget total of about $150 million, and then another $60 million or so for marketing costs. So it had a huge amount of money behind it, which is what gave Miller the freedom to really show the true vision he had for these movies. And you can see the potential from the first couple of films, but with this, he had all the resources he needed at his disposal, and they spent 7 months shooting this in the desert. And I think that this film is unique because it is the purest sense of an action movie that has ever been made, where if you think about it, this movie is just an action sequence. It's just a chase from start to finish. Right when Max is taken captive by the war boys until the end of the film, it's pretty much a nonstop chase. And he expanded the chase sequence into 2 hours.
And Miller, he has this insane vision that he couldn't have made 30 years ago. And he's kind of like the Romero of the zombie genre. He's the Romero of the post-apocalyptic genre, where he basically wrote the rules for this genre and helped create it what it was. And obviously you still see similarities between modern post-apocalyptic films that are trying to grasp what Mad Max has created in those early films, like especially like The Rover and The Book of Eli. They look just like Mad Max, this barren wasteland of people, scavengers fighting and just trying to survive.
But he also makes it look very unique from any other dystopian post-apocalyptic film before it, because the style he used in this film, he shot it with extremely saturation, very high levels of saturation and color, and he did that on purpose because he wanted Mad Max Fury Road to look different from any other apocalyptic dystopian movie. And all of those other movies in the genre, they're desaturated, they're very bleak in color, and they're very muted. But with Mad Max Fury Road, it's super saturated. There are extremely high levels of oranges, blues, reds, and it's just the colors just pop on the screen, unlike anything you've seen before in this genre. And I think that really sets it apart, because every scene you can really see the deep blue of the sky contrasted with the orange sand of the desert, and it's beautiful.
And then the nighttime shots, which we'll get into later on, are even incredibly vibrant blues too. And I think it's just the perfect metaphor of this entire film. Aesthetically, what we're about to see is Mad Max's opening line, where he's like, "My name is Max, and my world is fire." So, like, that's what he says, right?
Yeah.
So it just opens up that we're going to see something very colorful, and obviously less of that desaturated look that we usually see in more bleak post-apocalyptic films.
Yeah, and it's actually a great way to keep the audience engaged, because orange and blue, the 2 main colors of this movie, they're on opposite sides of the color wheel, so they're very engaging to the eye of humans, and they keep us our attention on the screen. And it's in the marketing, it's in all the shots, this contrast of these colors, and I think it just looks fantastic. And it's the cinematography in this movie is unbelievable, and it's kind of absurd when you watch this movie to think that they actually filmed all of these action set pieces, because this is probably the most impressive film to showcase stunt work ever made. The vast majority of the stunt work, of the action, of the crashes, of the cars, of the fight scenes is real in-camera work that they did. It's not CGI. They use CGI to manipulate the images in ways of changing the color palette, of changing the landscape of the desert. So the deserts they shot in, they weren't exactly like that. They had to literally paint with CGI new backgrounds to make it look a little more expansive and to fit the needs of the vision. And also, they changed mountain ranges. They changed rock formations to help with the script, like that scene where they get trapped within that valley, that tight valley. That most of that CGI, and they just added that in. And also the Citadel is obviously all CGI, but otherwise, there's everything that you see is shot in camera, which is why it looks so impressive, because when a car crashes or explodes, it's a real explosion.
This episode is also brought to you by Manscaped, the leaders in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your comfort, obsesses over their technology developments to provide you the best tools for your grooming experience. Again, it's the holiday season. You got to get your gift shopping done. Do it early so you don't have to stress about it in mid-December. Manscaped.com is the perfect place to get gifts for all the men in your life. You got a boyfriend, a husband, brother, siblings, cousins, uncles, aunts, your father. I'm telling you, any guy would love any product from Manscaped. We got their performance packages. They send us their briefs, t-shirts. Their cologne smells fantastic. Like, I don't wear cologne, but I kind of dig this cologne a lot. Their lawnmower is the best buzzer I've ever used in my life. It's got a light on it. It's waterproof. The weed whacker is a great way to, subtly tell the men in your life that they need to trim up specific spots like their nose hairs and ear hairs. So it's, you got to groom. We got to groom. It's part of life. We're human beings. We got hair growing everywhere. So manscaped.com. Use Raiders of the Lost at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. Again, Raiders of the Lost at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. This was a 7-month shoot in the desert of Namibia. The stunt crew was trained by Cirque du Soleil, so they truly deserve a ton of recognition for this film, as much as they can get, because in no other movie will you see stunt actors doing what they're doing in this film, where they're just driving high speed, these crazy rigs, these cars, and they're just exploding cars everywhere. There's fire everywhere. There's just that high octane diesel everywhere. They're jumping from car to car, and it's just incredibly impressive. And these stunt men and these stunt women are just insane maniacs who deserve all the credit in the world.
He really upped the ante with what you can do in action, and like we've said previously, people can tell when CGI is on screen and when something isn't real. And I think the reason why this movie is so effective is because we can tell that all of these cars, all these motorcycles, all these rigs, they're real, they're tangible, and they're not made from computer graphics animation, and they actually have the actors on them and the stunt people on them. And I think it's so impressive, and that's why the movie works, because we know it's real.
And again, I keep talking about this vision that George Miller had that only really he could probably see, and his graphic artist could see, and his storyboarders could see, because I think he storyboarded it with a graphic novelist designer.
A team of them.
So the illustrations are phenomenal for what they came up with before they filmed. But again,
they made about 3,000 storyboards.
Yeah, but Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, they were known for on set. They had doubts about the production and were curious. They maybe didn't fully understand what exactly they were making, what kind of film they were making, because again, they're in the desert for 7 months filming. Who knows what they were doing for 7 months? As explosions and cars and chases. They were probably thinking, like, what is the story of this entire film? And I read that Hardy was even quoted as saying that he had to apologize to Miller for when he first saw the movie and he finally understood the vision that Miller had for the entire film.
You can understand and empathize with what they were going through, because obviously, like we said, they painted a lot of the backgrounds to change the backgrounds from what they were really shooting in. So the deserts they were shooting in, they weren't as impressive and as expansive as we saw in the film. They were very simple deserts, and they were just outside of a village and outside of that city. And in terms of being an actor on that set, where you're spending like months just sitting in the front seat of a truck, and Miller is handling the entire production of all these stunt teams and coordinations, and he knows what the movie's going to look like when it's all done. But when you're the actor on set, you can't understand the vision that the director has in terms of not just what he's shooting, but what he's going to add to the scenes and what he's going to add visually after the fact of shooting.
Yeah, so I completely understand that like myopic sense of feeling for the film and not be able to see the full vision of it. So I totally get what they were going through. Again, 7-month shoot in the desert. And then Margaret Sixel was the editor of this film, and she's George Miller's wife. And she won the Oscar for Best Editing in this film. And he chose her to do this despite never editing an action film before, because he wanted it to look not like every other action movie that's come out. Because you could easily see how someone could have turned this movie into just looking like this great action film, but not transcendent like the way it was. And I think the editing by Margaret Sixel is one of the most important aspects of this film. It's sensational editing, some of the best you'll ever see. And she had 470 hours of footage to go through before she started editing, which took 3 months to view and catalog.
That's a lot of footage. And it really pays off because the editing is different from other action films because it's not a lot of cuts. She holds on to shots for a while before she cuts them. It's not back and forth, back and forth. Each shot, there's a couple of seconds or a few seconds even in the most intense action scenes. So she takes her time with the editing. And that vision also translates into the story as well, because there are a lot of feminist themes in Mad Max Fury Road. I think the main character is not actually Max. The main character is Furiosa, and her story along with trying to save the wives of Immortan Joe. And I think that it has a lot of feminist themes in terms of a woman's identity and being in control of her own body and being in control of her own life and not allowing men to decide their fates in life. And I think that those are the strongest themes that resonate for me in the film.
Yeah, I think I read that he had the writer of the Vagina Monologues was a consultant on the script for this film to really give that strong female voice and the feminist voice to this film and the characters, which clearly comes across.
And it also displays the social themes of power and how Immortan Joe, because he controls the water, he has control of the most important resource, and so he controls the people, and they've become desperate and they live each day trying to get as much water as they can from Joe when he releases the water for a short amount of time. And the power he has over these people, he abuses it, and it can be definitely seen in the world today of people who have power and abuse their powers over the citizens of their lands.
Which is something we'll commonly see in these dystopian post-apocalyptic films. And Immortan Joe is just this terrifying character, but despite being like this god that he's created himself into for these people of the desert and the war boys that he commands, he's physically very weak, and he can barely even stand up without or survive without his life support and his breathing mask and whatever he's got going on, like his Darth Vader-esque costume, and which I think he makes look terrifying on purpose because that hides the true weakness of him internally from everybody else. That's why he's got a very scary mask, and his body armor has it's just ripped and chiseled, and he looks way more intimidating than he probably actually is behind the mask.
Yeah, and Miller shows a shot of his body from behind, and it looks like he's dying, and his body is weak, and he's got warts and cysts all over him. And you're right, he covers himself with this armor that makes him look more fierce and intimidating, because the only way he's able to maintain his power is through fear, and fear is the most motivating emotion you can put within people to make them bend at your will.
This episode of Raiders of the Lost podcast is brought to you by our good friends at movieposters.com. Use coupon code Raiders15 to get 15% off your order today. It's the holiday season. It's time to get all your gifts, all your presents. I'm sure you have some movie-loving friends and family members out there. Getting them a gift from movieposters.com is the best thing you can get them using the coupon code Raiders15 to get 15% off your order right now at checkout. They offer great designs like plaque designs, original designs, framing, backlight, canvas. Definitely check them out, movieposters.com, Raiders15 for 15% off your order. And Hugh Keys-Byrne plays Immortan Joe. He's the actor who also played the lead villain in the first Mad Max movie. And again, Furiosa, she's the lead character in this film. It's her story. She has the master plan. She's the one who makes the courageous decision to free the villain's concubine and his prized breeders, these women he has oppressed their entire lives and controlled their entire lives. And she's the one that takes the lead of this story. And it's great because obviously Mad Max is the name of the franchise. You could call it it's like Star Wars. It's the title of the franchise in the world. And then it's just, I love Miller taking that and flipping on its head where he just uses it as the moniker of the brand. Obviously Max in this movie too, but having the strong female lead of this action movie with one arm, total badass, shaved head, just flips the action genre on its head, especially what you probably expected to happen with when you hear when we heard Tom Hardy got cast as Max, and like obviously Charlize Theron we knew would be in it too, but you assumed that Max would be the lead character of this movie, and it would be his storyline, but it's all Furiosa.
And I don't think Max could be the lead of this film. It wouldn't work because he's reached a point in his life where he's been living in this dystopian hellhole for so long, and he's become this lone ranger in a way. He's given up on trying to help people. He's given up on trying to insert himself into the lives of others, and he's just literally reached this point where he's just trying to survive day by day and nothing else. And from the size of his beard and his hair when we first see him, he's probably been alone for years now. And so I don't think he's mentally or emotionally able to have any kind of his own story or goal to achieve, because he doesn't have a goal anymore. It's just survival. And that's why Furiosa has to be the lead of this film, because she has a goal and she has a journey that she's trying to overcome. And that's why this movie and story has to center on her character.
Yeah, Max is shaped by the world he lives in. You can tell he, at one point in his life, was probably a decent and moral man, but he's forced to live with just one purpose in his life, and that is to survive, which he brings up multiple times.
Yeah, he was decent before the first film when he was just a cop, but then his family was killed, and that was the first nail in the coffin for his humanity. And now he's just reached this point where he's barely human.
Yeah, and I think the biggest criticism I've heard of this film is Max's minimal dialogue. And as we've said it many times in the show, you don't need dialogue to tell a story. You don't. And Max says 52 lines total of dialogue, and some of those lines are like 1 word, 2 words.
Tom Hardy does a whole lot of grunting in this movie too.
But I mean, I don't mind it at all. That's just part of the performance. That's part of who Max is now. He's been living by himself. He hasn't had anyone to talk to. And he's really he has that mentality where he doesn't want to trust anybody. So that's why he has minimal dialogue in this entire film. And he's plagued with these constant memories and visions of his past, of all these people who he couldn't help or he couldn't save. And he's been haunted by that for where he is now. And the little girl in particular that's constantly coming up in his visions, they explain in one of the prequel comic books that came out after the film that he was a little girl that he couldn't save.
Also, his behavior is a little weird at first, like his facial tics, and he often grunts instead of speaking because, like you said, he's been on his own for so long. It's like being stuck on a desert island for years and then returning to people, and you don't really know how to socialize. So he's socially awkward, and he's forgotten how to like interact with people. I mean, he's just been driving around in his car for years in the desert, so clearly he wouldn't be someone who's gonna go off on these lengthy monologues or have a great personality. So it makes sense for the character where he is in his life to not have that much to say, as opposed to the Mel Gibson films where he actually does have a lot to say.
Whereas Furiosa, her soul and her hope are what drives this entire film and drives the storyline. She's like the only source of humanity we see, but her in the breeders that she helps escape. And her final desperate attempt in life is to save these innocent women and return to her home of the green world. And this is something that she's clearly been planning for a long time, and she's going to follow through with it no matter how suicidal or how improbable it will be to pull off. And she's just desperate to see a new step for humanity, maybe a new generation of people living in more equality and trying to build something more rather than living in that godlike control of Immortan Joe at the Citadel.
Yeah, and Furiosa, in her hope, in her drive, is the main force that changes Max as a character, because when this film starts, Max believes that he needs to just be on his own and be alone and just survive, and he doesn't want to help anyone. He doesn't want anyone's help. And then the first chance he gets, he abandons Furiosa and the woman because he believes he needs to just be alone to survive. But obviously, she set that the settings on the truck to make it the kill switch is on the truck, so he can't go. And then again, later in the film, Max has the opportunity to just leave on a motorcycle and abandon these people. And so it's because of Furiosa that Max decides to not only help these people, but come up with a plan and ends up putting his life in danger to help these people. So she changed his character, and he transformed because of her.
Yeah, he transforms from just a survivor to a redeemer and something more. He chooses to put his life on the line to save the woman and help them get back to the Citadel. He uses his blood when he was already short on blood from the beginning of the story, it being a blood bank, to one of the war boys to gives his blood to Furiosa, despite how I don't think it's scientifically accurate just because you're a universal donor that your blood can give to anyone. I think there's a little more biology involved, but still it's fun to let that go. But I think one of the most fascinating parts of this film to me are the war boys of Immortan Joe. And these characters, they're just visually just incredibly disturbing and intriguing at the same time, where they just covered in this pale white, they're bald, they have blackened eyes, they look incredibly weak and sick because they're clearly from this world of radiation, and their half-lives, which they get called multiple times, meaning they're probably going to die in their early 30s, maybe a little sooner, and they're clearly going through some sort of leukemia or cancer, some cancer of the blood. I think that's what leukemia is. And you can tell they have cancer, obviously, from the tumors around their necks and all over their bodies, and just how visibly sick they are. And they need these blood banks to survive to the fullest extent of their final parts of their lives, which is where Max and Nux kind of become a pair in the beginning of the film, as Nux uses Max as this blood bank to survive during this battle where they're going to track down Furiosa.
Yeah, Nicholas Hoult is great in this movie, and the War Boys they're intensely devoted to Immortan Joe as more of a spiritual, religious god or deity to them, and he's convinced these people that if they die defending him in his world, then they'll be welcomed into Valhalla. That's the greatest honor a war boy can achieve, and it's this really great image where before they sacrifice themselves, they spray paint that silver chrome all over their mouth and teeth. I think that when they do that, it could be a drug that gets them high, and it's kind of like euphoric for them, and so that allows them to feel more willing to sacrifice themselves as well. So when they're spray painting their faces, I think they're getting high doing that.
Oh, absolutely, because it's chrome paint, so you're gonna get pretty buzzed off that. And also, it's like they worship V8, the deity of high octane and gasoline and guzzling, and like you said, they have that belief that they'll enter Valhalla. And I think in Warboy, Nux says that line, I live, I die, I live again. So they have this belief that if they follow Immortan Joe's philosophy, they'll live forever, basically. Yeah, which is obviously common in a lot of different organizations that we've seen do horrible things in the world.
So this world is filled with incredible characters, and it's such a unique vision. It's endlessly entertaining. There are a couple major set pieces of action in this film that are just so stunning, incredible. And whenever I watch this movie, I literally feel my heart rate pounding because it's so intense, and it's exciting to see these vehicles and this stunt work, and it harkens back to the old style of filmmaking where it's not just all CGI and special effects and animation. It's real actors and stunt people and really driving these cars, and also Miller gets so ridiculous with it at times, and like tongue in cheek, like having that crazy guitar player with a flamethrower on the end of the guitar,
which was real.
Yeah, it was a real flamethrower, and the drummers with the giant speakers. So it's a little ridiculous in a good way.
But I think what really, again, ties it all together is the editing, because in going back to Margaret Sixel and her editing, she'll focus on, there's so many different action sequences going on at the same time in all these chase scenes. You know, each part of the truck has a little fight going on. There's people constantly trying to jump on the trucks, and she does a great job not staying too long on each one of these sequences, where normally we'll see like an action scene and two people will fight for like what feels like 3 minutes. She's bouncing around with these great cutting techniques where we're seeing here real quick. We're not seeing too much of what's happening in the front deck. We're seeing this other person coming from the side attacking the truck. So she's great job at like flowing through the entire scene to give us a quick glimpse of everything that's going on.
You're absolutely right. You're able to process everything, even though there's so many moving parts and there's so many people involved in every action sequence. You're never confused. So you're absolutely right. I think that's why she won the Oscar, because she keeps you in the film, and she keeps you informed and able to process the situations and the action that's happening in front of you.
And you talked about the beautiful aesthetic of these deserts, and they're so vibrant and so red and colorful, and then it's perfectly contrasted with these night sequences, which are so blue and also vibrant, which normally when you'll see a night sequences, it's very dark, but the way they did this, it's not super common anymore. But Miller filmed these night sequences in pure daylight. It's called day for night filmmaking. And all these shots, again, broad daylight, so you can see everything. And obviously, people don't do this very often, because it would be great to film more at night, but cameras and film stock is not as sensitive as the human eye, so you can't really pick up what you can really see as a person, despite it's getting better and better every year. A lot of cameras nowadays are pretty much practically seeing in the dark as it is. But what they did to film these is they overexposed the shots, and then they desaturated a little bit and just added so much blues and colors to these nighttime sequences. And the benefit of overexposing these shots is the darks and the shadows aren't clipping to black, and you can actually see a lot of detail in there.
It's almost like you can see the same way that nocturnal animals can see at nighttime. And I think the reason why filmmakers don't really use this technique is because what happened in this film and what Miller does is, like you said, he desaturates the image and then he adds a lot of blue. And what that does is it takes away all the other colors from the image, so all you see is blue. The entire image on every person, every article of clothing, it's all blue, 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 blue. Whereas if you filmed it at nighttime, it would be, a cooler image, but then you'd still see the other colors in the scene. And so I think that it works in this film because in the daylight, you get so much orange and brown from the desert. And a lot of the clothing of the characters it matches the tones and colors of the desert itself. And so you're able to contrast that by making the nighttime scenes all blue. And so that's why I think it works, because it's really it's a great contrast of the orange and blue and day and night.
Yeah, I don't think this would really work in other films. It's just because this film aesthetically looks like a graphic novel. It's so vibrant, so colorful, so it's obviously will work to contrast the daytime with very colorful and bright night times. And Furiosa is faced with the horrible dilemma and realization that when she finds the other woman from her green world where she grew up, in that this place, the green place, just like everything else in the world, has died, and they have no other option. And obviously Mad Max comes up with the idea to go straight back to the Citadel, come back with the way they came. It's unprotected, and to take it over and to beat Immortan Joe there.
And then there's that great action sequence where they do encounter Immortan Joe and his crews. They do get away and they make it to the Citadel. And what they find is that the people at the Citadel, they're happy that Immortan Joe has been killed, and they celebrate his death. And even the other members of Joe's circle decide to let Furiosa up and welcome her instead of Immortan Joe, because they know it would endanger themselves, because the public is so elated at his death.
And the war boy Nux, he goes through an incredible character transformation where he becomes an ally to the woman and to Max and to Furiosa, and he ends up sacrificing himself to save the other woman.
Yeah, because his philosophies and everything he's been taught, he's learning is false and not true, and he's just being used by Immortan Joe.
And there's obviously some major themes going on in this film related to our current world in terms of, water conservation and renewable energy and using resources efficiently, and war for oil, and maybe there's going to be a war for water someday, and how to try to avoid those problems that we're going to eventually run to at some point, because this world only has so many resources, and it keeps growing in terms of population. So we're gonna have to try to take better care of what's going on in our day-to-day lives. And it's also similar to, it reminds me of Ready Player One, whereas in terms of, it's not oil and water, it's bandwidth, and like the whole war for the internet, and kind of like they have to live their world in that virtual reality. So it kind of reminds me, and that's also a dystopian post-apocalyptic world too. So it reminds me of Ready Player One in some ways.
Yeah. And the water is a resource that in 50 years, it could be an extremely limited supply unless something is done. And I know a lot of people talk about just climate change and oil and natural fossil fuels, but water is a resource that could be in great danger in the coming decades. And this film is based upon the idea of water running out across the world, and the reason why Immortan Joe has powers because he has the water, and that could end up happening one day.
And it's so ironic because the majority of the planet is underwater. Just got to figure out how to get all that salt out efficiently.
You can do that, but it's the machinery required is far too expensive to be able to make enough of it that would supply fresh water to people on Earth. So it's an unfeasible way to solve that problem. It's all about trying to preserve the fresh water on Earth.
Mad Max Fury Road is a sensational film. Absolutely blew my expectations out of the water. It's really fun time. George Miller doesn't take his foot off the pedal from the moment the film begins, and it's a great action film, one of the best in the genre ever.
Yeah, this is one of the greatest action movies ever made, and it's going to stand the test of time for sure. And it's going to set the stage for what you can do with action in the future.
Next up, we have Children of Men, released in 2006, directed by Alfonso Cuarón, written by Alfonso Cuarón, Timothy J. Sexton, David Arata, Mark Fergus, and Hawk Otsby, based on the book by P.D. James. This film had a budget of $76 million and a global box office of $70 million. In 2027, in a chaotic world in which women have become somehow infertile, a former activist agrees to help transport a miraculously pregnant woman to a sanctuary at sea. This film stars Clive Owen, Julianne Moore, Michael Caine, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Claire Hope Ashity, and Charlie Hunnam.
This is one of my favorite movies, hands down. And we've talked about Cuarón a couple of times with Azkaban and with Gravity. He also made Roma, the Y Tu Mama Tambien. I could compare him to a Stanley Kubrick type figure in filmmaking because he doesn't make that many movies, but every movie he makes is extremely impactful and powerful. Obviously, they have very different styles and aesthetics, but I think what Alfonso Cuarón does with his filmmaking is he always transports you into the movies, unlike any other filmmaker before. He helped bring the sense of realism to American cinema. Because his Mexican films he made before he made American films, they also used a lot of handheld work and a lot of long takes. And obviously, he inspired filmmaking in the early and mid-2000s for Americans to bring the realism to their cinema. And it's different from the realism of French cinema, where they began using very long takes, but they weren't using handheld too often. And Cuarón really brought handheld filmmaking to the scene of America. But a lot of people think that adding realism handheld is the only thing that makes things feel realistic in film, but it's the combination of handheld camera work along with very long takes that really transport you into a scene and make it feel like real life, because his theory is that life doesn't have cuts and life doesn't have edits. And so the longer you can hold on a scene, the more it transports the audience into the moment with the characters inside of the film.
Yeah, the handheld, of course, shoulder-mounted handheld, which isn't super common in a ton of films. Obviously, you'll see handheld, but it's usually some sort of Steadicam or some.
They'll even make it handheld on purpose.
Some sort of rig to make it a little smoother, but there's a lot of shaky handheld in this film, which he actually gets a shot of this in Prisoner of Azkaban when Harry opens the door. It's the only shot that's handheld in that movie, and shaky handheld, because obviously it's paying homage to his style. But Cuarón really pioneered this style that's reached modern Hollywood of realism and handheld. And this film was one of those movies in my youth that really changed my perception on film and really helped me develop a true passion and love of movies. And it's a true modern masterpiece. One of my favorite movies made this century, one of my favorite movies ever. And I think Alfonso, this is the best film, I think, in his career still, even with how good Roma is and everything. And it's possibly also the most underrated and most underappreciated film ever made. I mean, it was a commercial flop. It grossed $70 million on a budget of $76 million. At Oscar time, it was mostly overlooked. It only earned 3 nominations, none for acting, directing, or Best Picture, which is blowing my mind just thinking about that. And the studio never really figured out how to sell it. I think they didn't understand really what it was or how good it actually was. And, the biggest pull to the movie, Clive Owen wasn't a massive movie star at the time. He was in Closer a couple
He was
years
just big in Europe.
Yeah. Julianne Moore is the big draw. She's the star in the movie, and she, spoiler, gets killed within 28 minutes of the movie. And it debuted at Venice Film Festival and got a standing ovation, obviously, because of how good it is. But still, they chose other films to prop up as their bait for Oscar picks. I think they did United 93 was their big option to go for to try to get Best Picture nominations. And this left Cuarón very frustrated because he put so much into this movie. He put his entire basically career on the line with this movie, and it obviously didn't make a lot of money. And I think I read that he had very intense and difficult years of his life after making this, because it really put him down a dark rabbit hole, because he probably was limited in what he could do after this.
I don't think people understood what this movie had in it. It was very much ahead of its time, and the reason why it's become such a revered classic is because I think it takes repeated viewings of this movie to really fully digest what Cuarón put into it, because there's so much substance into the story. It's not just a on the surface it's a simple story, but there's so much depth to it in terms of religious symbolism, artistic symbolism, humanity, the themes of the world, of the crises of the world that we're facing today, like immigration and refugee crises in the Middle East, and the lack of resources, and
The COVID pandemic.
Yeah, the COVID pandemic. This film came out in 2006, and the film is set in 2027. And in this film, they detail that in 2020, in this world, a viral pandemic spread across the entire globe and changed the earth. And this movie came out in 2006, so they literally predicted something like that would happen. And great philosophers have stated that civilization can end very quickly and very easily if a few certain things happen in terms of global catastrophes. And this film is the result of a few global catastrophes in terms of the lack of fertility among humans, as well as the spread of pandemics, viral pandemics, and the spread of anarchy throughout various countries across the earth. And so all of these catastrophes and crises culminated in the world that these characters live in now.
And also constant warring countries too. Mass war is one of the main points, one of the main turning points of this world, and what led to the destruction of basically modern society, where now Britain is really the only country, despite how unhinged it is, that has some sort of stability.
It shows you news headlines throughout the entire film. You see various, it'll be on newspapers, it'll be on television, and some of the media news headlines you see in this film are Africa devastated by nuclear fallout, U.S. troops at full attack, militias occupy Cincinnati, Russia in crisis, bombing of Saudi pipeline disrupts world oil supply, war and famine lead to mass migration, all foreigners now illegal. And so these are headlines that they seem like they are absolute possibilities, especially after dealing with the last year within 2020 of things that could happen in the future. And all it takes is a combination of catastrophes and conflicts to spin the world into chaos.
And I think Cuarón opens this film up brilliantly, where he so effectively shows you this world that you're living in and the toll it's taken on citizens. And he opens it up in that cafe with all these people, these citizens just in line, but they're just entranced by what's happening on the news, where they're talking about how the youngest person alive, who was the most famous person on earth, was killed, stabbed to death because he wouldn't sign an autograph, and he died at 18 years old, which means the youngest person who was alive is dead. And he contrasts this with these people watching this program, and they all have this look of despair and this loss of hope, which is the main theme of the film. Hope is the main theme of Children of Men. And he shows you the loss of hope in these people's faces. And then also he shows the lead character, Theo, doesn't even care what's on the news. He just walks through all these people, orders a coffee, leaves this cafe, walks 10 steps, and then there's an explosion right behind him. So he's just showing you this messed up world and how dark it is, and how the will to live has basically not fully left human beings, but it's pretty close to leaving everybody's spirit.
Exactly. And this opening scene is also a brilliant one take. And Cuarón does two things to show Theo as a character who's different from everyone else in the cafe. And the first one you already mentioned is that he has no reaction to Baby Diego's death. And for the general public, Baby Diego's death is the death of hope. He was the last line of hope that humanity had because he was the last baby that was born. And Theo, as a character, he already has no hope. He's complete. He lost his hope before humanity lost their hope, because he had a child who died years previously. So that put him on this downward spiral of nihilism and thinking that life has no meaning. And so he's already gone in hope, in terms of hope. And so that's why he has no reaction to Baby Diego. And also, Cuarón, being a great director and blocker, in order to make Theo stand out for the audience when we're watching this film, all of the background actors in this cafe, they're actually cast purposely because they're very short. And so when Clive Owen stands beside all these characters, he's much taller than him, so the audience their eyes gravitate towards him. So we already know immediately this person's important and this person is different from everyone else in the scene. And so that's a subtle hint of blocking and production design to show us, the audience, that Theo, Clive Owen, is an important character.
And these handheld shots and these long takes are incredibly effective at bringing realism to the film, like we've talked about. And that's the main benefit of it. But also there is a con to it where it requires an incredible amount of blocking, like you just explained, and time. So it takes a toll on a film crew. It takes a toll on a director and the producers, spending so much time, spending so many hours just to get these one shots. And the movie uses several lengthy shot sequences. The longest of these is a 3-minute and 19-second scene, one take of Key giving birth. The 4-minute and 7-second ambush on the country road of the car driving. And the end of the film has that incredible 6-minute, 18-second long take of Theo gets captured by the fishes, escapes, and runs down a street through a building of a raging battle. So these are incredibly complex scenes, and Cuarón and Emmanuel Lubezki, the cinematographer, are expertly craft these sequences into highly detailed scenes where, yeah, it's just one camera, one take, but they're getting so many different kinds of shots. They're getting close-ups, they're getting reactions, they're getting wide shots. So all these, not even just them, but the characters and the actors have to be on their A game, and they really have to plan this out because they all have to react perfectly because it's a giant play, really, one take.
Yeah, it's just like theater where the actors and the crew, they rehearse over and over and over again, and then they have like 2 days to film. And the reason why it's so effective is because of the way they shoot it with this guerrilla-style documentary-ish context and visual aesthetic. It makes it feel like these long takes are improvised and they're not planned, and it makes it seem like we're just following Theo and the others and we're reacting rather than the camera work already knowing what they're doing, the crew and the actors. So it makes it feel like everything is fresh and like it's really happening before our eyes rather than it being like perfectly choreographed. Even though it is choreographed, the way they film it makes it seem very spontaneous.
And that's how we experience the world. We don't experience the world in cuts. Yeah, we blink our eyes and look in different directions, but we're really experiencing these internal log takes, and that's what we're watching. And that's why it feels so much like real life, watching these entirely long, extremely long takes that really show you the world and show this world that Cuarón's created.
I think one of the most powerful parts of the film is that if you think about it, this movie takes all of the problems and tragedies and crises and conflicts of third world nations in terms of like extreme poverty, refugee crises, immigration crises, dominating government, and it brings all these third world problems into a first world nation like England. And so it allows people who, like us, who grew up and live in first world countries to finally see firsthand what it would be like if our societies fell under the same problems that third world countries suffer under. And it's really fascinating.
In much of the filmmaking, yes, we're following these characters, and Cuarón does these following shots to make it seem like you're just following Theo around, you're following these characters around, and he wanted to make it seem like you just took your own camera, and it's documentary style at times, but also he likes to take the attention away from the storyline and away from the characters and show you what's happening in the world, what's happening in the background. You know, he gets so many shots of just the buildings and rubble and the background actors and billboards.
People in cages.
What they're saying, yeah, the refugee detainee cages, even the buses with barred windows and the graffiti and everything. All this builds this horrifying, bleak world of just, again, the loss of hope and the destruction of human civilization.
It makes the world more believable because it feels like we're documenting the world, not just the characters, not just the actors, but when he moves the camera away from when a director moves the camera away from the actors, it's for a reason, and the purpose for this is to make it feel like we're inhabiting this world and we're observing not just the story, but the world they're set in. This film does a great job of showing the different ways in which people can react to catastrophes and conflicts like this. And each main character in this film has a different reaction to the infertility crisis. And Theo himself, we already talked about, he's nihilistic and he's completely hopeless. And he was hopeless before the crisis happened. And that's why he thinks that there's no future for mankind, and he thinks that the mission that Julian asks him to carry out is pointless, and he has no interest in helping the human project and helping Key out at first. And then Julian, his ex-wife, her reaction has been she's spent the last couple of decades continuing her fight against the government by becoming a leader within the terrorist organization. And Jasper, played by Michael Caine, his reaction to this world he's shutting himself off by using drugs to numb himself from emotion, and he's always high and he's always distracting himself from the problems of the world. Nigel, who played by Danny Houston, who is Theo's cousin in the film, and he's a wealthy bureaucrat who spends his time saving and restoring and protecting the world's most famous pieces of art. And his viewpoint is he doesn't even think about the conflicts and the crises. He doesn't even think about the future of humanity. He's living in the past. That's why he's preserving this art, because he lives in history and all he cares about is what happened before, and he's distracting himself from the realities of the future can bring.
And the irony of his character is the human race is about to be extinct. It's going to be extinct in one lifetime, and he's spending all of his time it makes him very wealthy. He clearly lives very well off compared to most people in the world. He spends all his time restoring things that will never be appreciated again, despite how beautiful the art is.
Danny Houston's character, Nigel, is an example of how Quran uses a great amount of art symbolism in this film to portray ideas. For example, in Nigel's diagram, he has Pablo Picasso's painting Guernica, which Picasso made in response to General Franco's bombing of Guernica, Spain, which killed 1,600 civilians. There's also a giant floating blimp in the shape of a pig outside of Nigel's building, and this is a reference to Pink Floyd's album cover for Animals, which was based upon the Orwellian novel about Stalin's rule over Russia as a communist dictator. And there's also a lot of famous Banksys you've seen throughout the film. And Banksy is obviously an artist who uses his art to depict social activism and display themes of social justice. And when Key reveals her pregnant belly to Theo, her pose is identical to this famous painting of the birth of Venus, which is about the fertility of mankind. Cuarón uses art throughout the film to translate the ideas he's showing with the story in a brilliant way.
And this film has an incredible plot of Theo smuggling the first pregnant woman in 20 years away from the government and away from these underground organizations into the Human Project to help cure the infertility crisis. So it's a sensational world that Cuarón's built, and it's an incredible plot that the author and these writers came up with.
And there's also a lot of religious symbolism in this film in terms of Theo you can say is comparable to Joseph because he's not the father of the baby, but he acts as a father figure and a protector of the baby. And Key is comparable to Mary, and the baby, Dylan, is essentially Jesus.
And Key is the key to the future. Her name is just imperfectly given. Mm-hmm. In the movie's advertising tells you why. She's aptly named. What happens is Theo is convinced to help Julianne Moore's character, Julian, and her organization smuggle Key out of the country to somewhere else, to that project.
This is one of my favorite Chiwetel Ejiofor performances. This is one of his major first roles as an actor, and I think he plays a great villain in this film, and it showed his talent as an actor.
Yeah, and so he's part of this organization that Julian is the leader of, and we have this infamous car one take where it's Julian, Theo, Key, and Miriam, the midwife, who's helping. And Luke, who's in the midwife. Miriam is taking care of Key in her pregnancy. And Cuarón wanted to make this amazing scene with one take inside the car with a camera, but the problem is you can't put a film crew in this van with character actors as well. There's no space at all for a camera. So Emmanuel Lubezki, he came up with this incredible rig to help fulfill Cuarón's vision, where they basically cut the roof off of this van, and they had this incredibly remote-operated camera system that moved around fluidly inside the car with the characters.
Yeah, it was above them.
Yeah, and the director and Cuarón and Lubezki actually sat above the car in this little chamber, and they controlled the camera movements and what was going on, and it allowed them to capture Quaron's vision where he wanted this long take with so much going on. I mean, they're driving down this road and there's people chasing after them and slamming on the windows. There's 4 characters in the car, and he's getting close-up shots of each one of them and what's happening next. And this camera rig, it just moves around fluidly throughout the car, getting wide shots, close-ups, where we get to see what's happening outside the windows. And he said he would have had to have succumbed to using green screen and CGI, but you really can't get the real effect that you can see of people running up to the car and the woods and the trees and the sky. And it's just an incredible scene.
And along with the camera that moved fluidly above the actors, the seats that the actors were sitting in, they also moved out of the way of the camera as the camera moved towards them to get a shot of another actor. That actor's chair would move back to give space for the camera, and then it would move back, into the car when they were on frame. So the entire car itself was this rig that manipulated every part of the car in order to get the shot. And this shot was made with not just exactly one single take, but I think it was 6 different shots that were blended together digitally.
And this leads to this incredibly moving scene where Julian gets shot through the windshield, and it's absolutely heartbreaking as an audience member because she was just, you learn that she had a relationship with Theo and they had lost a child, and they had a connection still, and that ping pong ball trick, which was super fun and cute to see them do, and just leads to her death right there, which means that they don't really know what's going to happen now with the organization because she was the leader, she was in charge. And it unfortunately leads to the scenes where we learn that Luke led this entire coup, basically, of Julian and assassinated her to get control of Key and her pregnancy, to use it for his revolution and use it as
he wants to use the baby as like a power play because Julian wants to bring the baby to the human project, but Luke wants to take it and keep it within the organization as a way to gain power from the government.
And right before Julian actually gets shot, there's in the car, Miriam is actually peeling an orange, and Quaron pays homage to the Godfather in this film. And whenever someone's eating an orange or there's an orange on camera, it means impending doom or death for a character in the film. And it's pretty emotional when you see it. And if you watch it again and you haven't noticed that, you can pick up on it happening multiple times in the film.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable scene, and the first time you see it, it's absolutely breathtaking. And this leads to Julian taking them the only place he knows that's safe, and that's Jasper's house. Jasper is one of my favorite Michael Caine performances ever. You've never seen him play a character like this, a weed-smoking hippie, political activist, and he adds a lot of comedy and personality to the film, and he's instantly lovable, and I think he steals the show every scene he's in.
He actually based his performance on John Lennon, who he says he was friends with, and he did a terrific job. He even looks like him. He's got the long hair, the beard. He's even got those round glasses. He sounds like him. He did like that very John Lennon nasally voice and his mannerisms. And Jasper, even though, like you said, he secluded himself away from everything, he's kind of like a ray of positivity and a ray of hope that we hadn't seen for quite some time in the film. So he brings a lot of color to the movie.
And like we said earlier, Jasper is a person, and his reaction to the world is he just numbs himself with drugs, and he's always smoking weed, and just he's constantly high, it seems. And also, him and his wife, this storyline shows the ways in which the world itself is reacting to the conflicts and this illusion of humanity. And for example, the Quietus drug, which is a company that provides a drug which allows you to kill yourself peacefully. And it's actually just like a prescribed drug, and there are commercials for it on television. And it's this incredibly dark concept that a government-approved drug to kill yourself is a commonplace thing in this world. And also, they have a cat as a pet, and one of the themes in this film, it's hidden in the background. Again, Quaron put so much in this movie without actually putting it in your face. It's all there, but you have to really look for it. Is animals are used by humans in this world as surrogates for children, and pets are more common than ever before in humanity. And there are even commercials on the televisions depicting ads for clothing lines for pets and all sorts of products for pets, because pets have become so important to people as surrogates for children.
And just to keep going on that, there's the deer in the elementary school, which I think the elementary school has one of the most beautiful shots in the film. And obviously we see that deer, which represents the children inside elementary school who aren't there. and it's a shot where Theo and Miriam are in a classroom. They're just surrounded by darkness and rubble of this classroom, and they're looking out the windows at Key, who's out on, I think she's on a swing, sitting down on a swing, and she's just basked in this glowing light of this window. And Quran geniusly has a piece of the window broken out, and this hole in the window is what frames Key outside, and she's just basking in this like heavenly glow and this heavenly light. And also right next to Key in the window is a construction paper drawing of a child attached to the wall. And then we look to the right of the frame, and it's Theo and Miriam again standing in darkness and rubble, and they're living in this desperate world, and the end of that civilization is there, and they're living in the past, and they're stuck there. Whereas Key is living in this light, and she's the future of humanity, and she's full of hope, and she's full of potential, and she's basically sort of this godlike figure, or this bringer of life to the world.
And Key, in her representation of hope, is what helps pretty much save and transform Theo as a character, where when he sees Key's pregnant belly, he understands the importance of the situation, and he's inspired to put his life on the line to help get Key across the border, and she instills new hope in him, and his character completely changes from this hopeless, nihilistic man in the opening of the film to a person who's willing to die for something greater than himself.
And it's quite the twist when we learn that Luke, at this little community that they have in these little ranches, that Luke's hired a hit on Julian again. And even there's so much realism in this film and so much tension that Quaron builds. And I think one of my favorite parts of this movie is when they escape from Luke and the others.
Yeah,
and they're in the car at the farmhouse and they can't get the car started, and they're rolling it down the hill, and just Charlie Hunnam is just huffing and puffing, sprinting down the hill, and he's really sprinting. He's running real fast. That guy looks like a good athlete. And it's just so much tension when they get to the bottom of the hill and trying to start the car. And Quaron basically creates the entire film, this immense tension, all leading to one singular moment at the end of the film.
It's an amazing sequence where the shot starts with Theo looking out the door of the farmhouse, and it leads to with him avoiding the henchmen, watching guard, and then powering the car and pushing it down the hill. And it's an amazing sequence, but it's still nothing compared to the final action sequence, where it's pretty much them running through the war-torn war zone and moving through the actual gunfight battle between the soldiers and Luke's terrorist organization. And it's one of the most astounding sequences ever put on film. And I remember my jaw dropped the first time I saw it. It was so incredible. And this is not like the car sequence where Quaron blended together different shots digitally. This really is one take that they shot without any digital editing at all.
And there's another great one take before that where Key gives birth, and this little Romanian woman helps them get into this little room, and they have I think they have just a mattress and a couple of blankets, and Theo has to help Key give birth to the first human being ever born in 20 years, and it's incredibly emotional and moving scene, and that leads to them moving on to try to get to the human project. And back to that incredible ending action sequence long take where they're inside the building and they're in the middle of this raging war between the soldiers and the revolters, and it's Key is carrying a child, an infant, and a baby in these buildings with soldiers everywhere, gunfire everywhere, explosions, and it's the baby's crying and screaming that stops the firefight. It stops the soldiers, and they're all just blown away, and they're speechless as they allow Key and Theo to walk out of that building before it gets destroyed and walk past them. And then the crazy thing is, after they walk past them, the firefight begins again.
It's a really incredible moment, and they're all awestruck because no one's seen a baby in 18 years, and no one's heard the cries of a baby in so long, and it's just a powerful moment to show what this baby means to humanity, where it stopped a war, it stopped a firefight just from existing, and it's one of the best moments of the film. And this is where Theo and Key, they very much are symbolisms for Mary and Joseph, and they're protecting Jesus, and as Joseph, he's a protector for these two.
And the Holy Family, and they make it to that boat before that. I think they call it an airstrike that's about to hit. Mm-hmm. So you have to get out of there, and they make it to the boat, And it's an incredibly beautiful scene where, as Theo's dying because he got a mortally fatal wound during the firefight protecting Key, he's showing her how to burp the baby. He's like, put her on your shoulder, and he teaches her how to burp a baby because she doesn't know how to burp a baby. She's never seen a baby before. And Theo dies protecting Key and the baby and getting them to the boat to be rescued by the Human Project.
And it's almost as if, because after this, she's alone on the boat, but then she can see the light of the Human Project's boat in the distance, so she's going to be saved by the Human Project. And it's almost as if the real story hasn't begun yet. This just sets the stage for the future of humanity. You know what I mean?
I think Quaron shows that by ending the film with the laughter and voices of children in the background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an unbelievable film, and I think that this really is one of the masterpieces of the last 20 years. Easily one of the best movies of the 21st century for sure. And I just think that people weren't ready for a film that was so deep and
plausible and real.
Yeah, and it had so much to say. And I think that people didn't understand it, and they weren't able to digest how much Quaron put into this movie and how much meaning it has. But now I think as time has worn on, people understand that this is a real significant piece of film.
The final film in the episode is Snowpiercer, released in 2013, directed by Bong Joon-ho, written by Bong Joon-ho and Kelly Masterson, based on the French graphic novel Les Transpersonnage. This film had a budget of $39 million and a global box office of $86 million. In a future where a failed climate change experiment has killed all life except for the lucky few who boarded the Snowpiercer, a train that travels around the globe, a new class system emerges. This film stars Chris Evans, Jamie Bell, Song Kang-ho, Ed Harris, John Hurt, Tilda Swinton, and Octavia Spencer. I love the idea of this movie where, in a failed attempt to cool the planet from global warming, the scientists' plan backfired and turned the entire planet into basically a frozen wasteland, wiping out the majority of the human civilization. And this genius engineer, Wilford, built this train that circled the entire globe until the temperature warmed and society could begin to rebuild.
Bong Joon-ho often throws social and political and environmental themes into his films, like, for example, The Host, which came out, I think, in 2006, and then with Parasite, in terms of social class. And he does the same with this, where he combines climate themes along with socio-political themes. And the train itself provides a perfect opportunity to show the different structures within a social hierarchy. And I think that he is a filmmaker who isn't too pretentious in terms of how he talks about ideas and themes within the world. And I think that this film is a fantastic way to talk about those ideas.
Yeah, it's a direct reflection on our society and what greed really can do to human beings in many ways. Not just greed for money, but also greed for power. The class structure shown on the train as we follow Curtis is shocking, and the back of the train is full of the lowest class of human beings that have been created on this train. This low class of human beings are also turned against each other, which is very common in low class societies today. And they resort to cannibalism when desperate, are punished for any vocal digressions, and they really only have one sole purpose, kind of like Max in Mad Max, to survive. And the great irony of the film is that the rich need the lower class people in order to survive, despite the way they treat them, which we'll get into later on. And they receive horrible punishments, like their arms get frozen and broken off, and they're separated from their families. Children are basically treated like cattle and stolen from mothers and fathers.
And they're forced to only eat this same kind of protein block. It's like this gelatin protein block that we end up learning is created using insects. I think one of the main themes of this movie is the power of fear, similar to Immortan Joe and Mad Max, where Wilford and the train in the higher classes of the train, they use fear to instill discipline and to instill conformity within the lower classes of the train. And the only reason they're able to rebel is because Chris Evans' character Curtis realizes that there's nothing to be afraid of because they have no more bullets left.
Yeah, and so Gilliam, played by John Hurt, kind of gives Curtis this idea and this belief that they can lead a revolt and they can take over the train. What they have to do is get to the engine room, and they have to go compartment to compartment to get there. And this is this wild journey that we're on with Curtis and Jamie Bell and the others, where we're seeing this class system, the structure that has been created based on superiority in terms of wealth or superiority in terms of power. And obviously the front of the train, or the controller of the train, is Wilford, who we don't really know much about besides the fact that he's basically worshipped like a god on this train. He's turned himself into a god, and the kids learn about him in the classroom, and he's created this ecosystem for survival for all the human beings despite what class system they're in.
And the ironic thing is that Wilford and the people in the higher class, they think that they're doing the lower class a favor by allowing them to live. They think that the lower class owes them their loyalty. You know what I mean?
And again, it's the lower class people that they need to survive to keep the train going.
And the idea is that the train has a closed ecosystem, and that it needs to be like this. Not everyone can be equal, or else the ecosystem wouldn't work out. And we end up learning that throughout the history of the train, Wilford has carried out various attacks and assaults on the lower class in order to reduce their numbers, as a way to keep the ecosystem alive and thriving. And if there are too many people on the train, then the ecosystem doesn't work, and it risks the lives of everyone on the train. And so the lower class citizens are always viewed as expendable for the good of the ecosystem.
And because there have been so many attacks on the lower class citizens, in that Wilford's had to stop so many revolutions, Curtis realizes that the guards have no ammunition, which means they really have no power over them. There's nothing to fear, which allows them to be able to overcome the guards. And again, with numbers, strength in numbers, they really have the power in this film, which again, we saw that in A Bug's Life, where they didn't realize that they had the power despite the grasshoppers having control over them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's actually very similar. And one of my favorite parts about this movie is obviously Tilda Swinton's character, Mason, who she's such a great actress and a character actor. And Mason was originally written to be a man, and Bong Joon-ho couldn't find an actor that he really, really felt was right for the role. And then he met with Tilda Swinton, and she seemed perfect for the role. And she adds so much color and charisma to the role. And every character she's played in her career couldn't be more different from the other. And she's obviously the highlight acting-wise of this movie. And even though she's a woman, many of the guards still refer to her in masculine forms, like Sir and Mr. And I think that she's easily the most interesting character in the entire film.
I agree. And the train itself reminds me of redlining in terms of the structure that's created. And redlining is a systemic denial of various services by federal government agencies, local governments, either or through the selective raising of prices for specific areas of cities. And a lot of cities are actually built this way to help to create lower class systems and lower class neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods and disadvantaged people, which is basically what happens to an extreme level on this train.
Yeah, and also redlining prevents young kids from being able to attend schools in other districts and other neighborhoods. They make it a law where you can only go to the public school in the county in which you live. So it prevents young people from ever developing the opportunities other young kids have who live in better areas. And that's seen in the film where the children that are born in the back of the train, they have no futures. And the children that are born in the front of the train, they go to school and they're educated and they are obviously given a better opportunity just based upon their births.
And of course, there are rare instances of jumping social class and succeeding well in life, but generally in class systems and in intense class systems in the world, if you're in a class, it's almost impossible to change that and to move up the ranks into different classes unless you're lucky and you work incredibly hard. There are obviously plenty of stories of people who grew up very impoverished and became very successful people, but this train, it's virtually impossible to do that.
And that is actually very much relevant in South Korea, which is why Bong Joon-ho often throws those themes into his films, and it's most known for his film Parasite, the differences in social class and class structure, and how one family has everything and lives a very comfortable life, whereas the other family, no matter what they've done in their lives, there's no way they will ever be able to get out of that half basement apartment they live underground. And Bong Joon-ho is trying to illustrate the idea that oftentimes for various cultures around the world, the system is rigged for people who live in lower classes.
And if a society, or there's a society of incredibly strict class structures, and the top 5%, like on this train, have basically trapped the rest of the population in a system that they can't rise from, and the severe inequality on this train, because of that, the only option is revolution. And that's why Gilliam devises that plan to revolt and take control of the engine room, using Curtis as the leader.
Yeah, and you can actually compare it to the civil rights movement in America, where back in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s, the social classes were very much in the favor of whites, and black citizens found it extremely difficult to jump social structures, and redlining was not illegal back then, so it prevented black people from being able to move into suburban areas, and black people as citizens were restricted with how they could, with the opportunities they had in life. And it wasn't until the civil rights movement and
the elimination of Jim Crow.
Yeah, elimination of Jim Crow, and the rebellious nature of the idea that all humans are created equal and deserve an equal opportunity, then black citizens were able to flourish in America. And also, what's happening in this film is that everyone believes that the Ice Age will never end, when in fact Namgung and his daughter, they recognize a city outside of the windows, and that is very important, because usually in the past they haven't been able to see anything from all the snow and ice that's covered the cities, but now there are actual landmarks that are visible, which means that the ice is actually melting.
And Namgun is basically the security expert I think he's asleep on the train.
Yeah,
they have to wake up, and they have to help them to move up compartment to compartment and be able to take over the engine room.
Yeah, him and his daughter have been asleep, and they had been given the drug Cronol, which subdues people and pretty much keeps them unconscious. And when they're woken up, they find themselves extremely addicted to Cronol, and throughout the course of the film, they will literally do anything to get their hands on this drug, which also ironically is extremely flammable.
Yeah, and so they move compartment to compartment, and we see these beautiful compartments in this hierarchy again of social structure and social class. And we see this Garden of Eden, we see this improbable aquarium, we see a classroom,
a sushi restaurant.
Yeah, they have hairstylists, they have everything. If you're an upper class citizen, you have all the luxuries that you had in the previous world. It's disturbing to see the way that some people are living compared to the people in the back and the tail end of the train, and how they really have no empathy for those people in the back.
So how can so few live with so much while so many live with so little? And it's actually a theme across the entire globe, and so many third world nations where the vast majority of the populations live in poverty. It's because those in power are corrupt, and the governments and the systems themselves are corrupt and keep the money from the people. And something similar has happened in this train, where the few in power have taken control of all the money and all of the resources of the train.
Yeah, I think there's a big debate in terms of, is this film tackling the nature of capitalism, or is it tackling the nature of politics? I think it's a little bit of both, because ultimately it's, the politicians who create the rules for our society. They create laws. And it's also, capitalists and capitalism coerces politicians, and they help create the systems that we're living in. So I think it's many aspects of both create inequality in the world. So I think it's a combination of capitalism and politics that Bong Joon-ho is trying to show.
And also, I think the morality of humans plays a part in that, in terms of the people making these decisions and the people who take advantage of power when they come into the power. And it takes an immoral person to take advantage of the weakest in society. And there are so many people in power across the world that really do take advantage of the weak and the poor and the impoverished to their own benefit and their own gain.
And this film has incredible action sequences for being on a train in such confined spaces. I mean, I love the brawl in that compartment that's completely dark, that's all night vision. It's really cool, like a first-person look at this fight. And then also the classroom scene with a shootout in there, and where the teacher is actually armed too, and it's just incredible, and it blows your mind, and it's unexpected.
Yeah, that big fight between the rebellious faction and the officers is great, and when they close the windows and the entire scene is only lit by the torches, they actually on set during the production they didn't use any other lighting aside from the actual flames from the torches, so that's all practical lighting, and it's a combination of beautiful and terrifying and disturbing because it gets pretty gory and the action is really intense, and it gets tragic because Edgar ends up being killed by one of the henchmen because Curtis is given the difficult option of either going after Mason and not allowing her to escape or saving Edgar's life, and he chooses Mason and allows Edgar to be executed.
Yeah, and it shows you that Curtis is willing to do anything to achieve his goal, to make it to the engine room, to get control of the train, which he eventually does. And we finally get to meet Wilford, who's played so well by Ed Harris, who's a fantastic actor. And again, Wilford has created himself into this god. He's the engineer of this train. He creates this ecosystem. He's created life for all these people. And I think Gilliam in the film tells Curtis that the first thing he should do is to cut out Wilford's tongue, so that he doesn't coerce him into not killing him and not taking over the train. But what Wilford does, which he should have done, because what Wilford does is he explains that Gilliam was in on this plan of revolution the entire time, which I think you have to kind of take with a grain of salt, because yes, you can believe that, but maybe that's a way of Wilford trying to coerce Curtis to give up or to not kill him too at the same time. Because why would Gilliam, a person who's sacrificed limbs for other people and lived back there for 18 years, want to take over the train, and why would he want to work with Wilford?
Well, Wilford says that Gilliam works with him because Gilliam understands that overpopulation would mean the death of everyone on the back of the train, and so I think he and Gilliam had this understanding. And also Wilford, the entire world thought he was crazy when he was building the train because he foresaw an apocalyptic future, and that's why he built the train. And I think that he's high on this godlike mentality because he proved that he was right and that the entire world was wrong. So he thinks he's better than everyone else.
And this is terrifying scene where Wilford's talking about how there are cons to every class on the train, and no one has it perfect, as he's eating his steak and potatoes in front of Curtis, who also has a plate of steak and potatoes in front of it, but he's just looking at it with he's looking at it with disgust. And this is where Wilford offers Curtis control of the train and control of his position. And we also discover here that the children are being used to keep the train operating. That's why I meant earlier that the wealthy and the powerful, they need the lower class citizens to survive. They need the lower class citizens to keep producing children to be able to operate the train to make sure it doesn't crash.
And seeing the children working in the engine as slaves is the turning point for Curtis to decide to destroy the entire system.
Because he almost was going to succumb to the power.
He was very close to succumbing to the power until he saw that his own people were being abused to allow the train to keep going. So then he realized the train should stop. The entire idea of the train needs to come to an end, and that's when he causes the destruction of the train.
Yeah, and he actually uses his arm to stop the train and the engine. It's this symbolic moment because in the beginning of the film, Chris says, he can't lead because he still has his arm, and later we understand that's because people in the back had been giving up limbs willingly as food for people when they were starving. And Curtis is one of the people who wouldn't do that. So in a way, having your arm intact or having all your limbs was sort of looked at as being a little selfish.
Also, Curtis and the other older men almost ate a very young Edgar when he was a child, but Gilliam sacrificed his arm to them rather than letting them eat Edgar.
And so Curtis uses his arm to stop the engine and finally repay that debt he had to put an end in a conclusion to the revolution.
Yeah, and that causes that plus the chronol that Mongoon sets up causes the train to collapse and crash into the mountainside of the frozen tundra. And the only two people that survive are the two young children, Yanni and the little boy. And when they exit the train, yes, there's still a frozen tundra, but they see a polar bear in the distance, and the polar bear just looks at them for a moment and then walks away, and then they realize that there is actually life on the frozen tundra, and the temperature is warming.
Yeah, and Bong Joon-ho says that he confirmed that they survived and ended up repopulating the Earth. But I also think you can also look at this ending in a more fun way, where I think you can also view the ending of this film as the extinction of the human race. Like, how are these two young people who've, never survived in the wilderness before, especially in a freezing environment? I mean, obviously the ice is thawing, but it's still a tundra. It's still a frozen atmosphere.
Yeah.
And it's still a frozen environment. They have no supplies. They're walking away from the perfect shelter, and they're walking away from supplies and everything. So that thing was stocked full of food. I mean, it didn't completely blow up.
Yeah.
Not to mention, I'm sure that polar bear is going to get hungry at some point. And so I think it's the class structure on the train created the inevitable end of the world for human beings.
Yeah, so I think Bong Joon-ho is saying that this kind of unfair structure will lead to the collapse of civilization. But I think it's a great ending, and obviously you can look at it as either hopeful or full of despair. But either way you look at it, this movie is terrific and very unique in its own.
And I think it's fun to talk about the ending too, because obviously I think some people wish that Curtis just took over control of the train, where if Curtis, became the leader of the train, he would still continue that hierarchy on the train, because, we're dealing with this train that's constantly in this loop, in this circle, which is a symbol for the entire film, where regardless of whoever is at the top, the hierarchy will continue, because he would probably reverse the roles, where the people in the back of the train would come to the front, and the people who are in the front of the train will have to go to the back, because they have to pay for their transgressions against the society.
But also, if he continues operating the train, he's still going to need little kids to work the engine with their little hands. So he's always going to need to take little children from their parents to keep the engine running. So it will never end.
And so really the only way to end this oppression is to just destroy the train and basically annihilate human beings, which is kind of what happens.
I guess it's better to die than to let this continue on. Bong Joon-ho often clashed with producer Harvey Weinstein on this film, especially in terms of the scene with the aquarium, where Weinstein thought it was a dumb scene and he wanted more action, and so he wanted to get rid of the scene altogether. But Bong Joon-ho told him that he needed the aquarium scene because his father was a fisherman who died, and the whole scene was a calling card to his father. And so Weinstein agreed, okay, you can keep the film in because it's important and family matters. And then Bong Joon-ho later revealed that he lied to Weinstein, and his dad never was a fisherman.
Snowpiercer, if you've never seen it, it's a sensational film from Bong Joon-ho. Obviously, Parasite is probably his masterpiece and his best movie so far, but Snowpiercer is a really fun time. It's a really unique film, and he did an incredible service to the original material.
Agreed. This is a fantastic dystopian film, and everyone should watch it. It's on Netflix. Check it out.
That's it for episode 42 of Raiders of the Lost podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel on YouTube and hit the notification bell wherever you're listening to us on audio streaming platforms, and follow us there, as well as supporting us on Patreon using all of our coupon codes to get all those great offers and discounts for your holiday shopping this season.
Don't forget to check out our Patreon. Join one of those tiers. Help us build this set even more.
Yeah, we want to get some more stuff.
Yeah. Take care, everyone.
Bye.